He lived as a common man to find true love, until his secret surfaced. When the Duke of Thornfield vanished from London society, no one suspected he was building a life in a tiny coastal village, falling for a governess who knew him only as Alexander Hart. But when the truth emerged, it destroyed everything. Subscribe now, because this story of hidden identity and impossible love will break your heart. The autumn wind howled through Whitmore Bay as a solitary figure stepped off the mail coach, collar raised against the salt spray and rain. The coastal village of Whitmore Bay had seen its share of travellers over the years, but few arrived with so little fanfare and such evident desire for anonymity. The man who stepped down from the London mail coach on that grey October afternoon in 1868 carried only a single leather bag and wore a plain wool coat that had seen better days. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, falling nearly to his collar, and his face bore the kind of weariness that came not from physical exertion, but from some deeper exhaustion of the spirit. "Whitmore Bay?" he asked the coach driver, though the weathered sign creaking in the wind had already confirmed his destination. "Aye, sir. Last stop before the coast road turns north. You'll find the inn just there, past the church." The driver gestured toward a cluster of stone buildings huddled against the cliff face, as if seeking shelter from the relentless sea wind. "Not many come here this time of year. Too cold for the summer visitors, too quiet for anyone else." "Perfect," the man said quietly, and something in his tone suggested he meant it with his whole heart. The driver gave him a curious look, but said nothing more, simply clicked his tongue at the horses and continued on his route. The stranger stood for a moment in the empty village square, letting the rain soak through his coat, breathing deeply of the salt air as if it were the finest perfume. For the first time in months, perhaps years, his shoulders seemed to drop from their rigid position, some invisible burden shifting if not entirely lifting. The village was exactly as he had hoped, small, remote, unremarkable. A place where a man might disappear into blessed ordinariness. The church stood at one end of the square, its Norman tower grey against the darker grey of the storm clouds. A few shops lined the cobbled street, their windows glowing warmly in the afternoon gloom. The inn, as promised, sat just beyond the church, its painted sign depicting a somewhat optimistic rendering of a sailing ship in calmer waters than these coasts had likely ever seen. He had taken perhaps 3 steps toward the inn when the rain intensified suddenly, transforming from persistent drizzle to driving downpour in seconds. The few villagers who had been about vanished into doorways. He looked around for the nearest shelter and saw the church door standing open, a rectangle of golden lamplight spilling onto the wet stones. Without hesitation, he ran for it. The interior of St. Mary by the Sea was humble, but beautiful in its simplicity. Wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshippers, walls of local stone, a few memorial plaques to sailors lost at sea, and at the altar, arranging autumn branches in a brass vase, a woman who turned at the sound of his entrance. She was perhaps 25, dressed in the sombre grey of a governess or lady's companion. Her hair, a warm brown that caught glints of bronze in the lamplight, was pulled back in a simple knot. She had an intelligent face, not classically beautiful but arresting in its expressiveness, and eyes that seemed to assess him with both wariness and curiosity. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, removing his dripping hat. "The rain caught me rather suddenly." "It does that here," she replied, her voice cultured but not affected, the accent of someone educated beyond her station. "You're welcome to wait until it passes. Though I should warn you, autumn storms on this coast can last for hours. Then I may be troubling you for some time. It's no trouble. The church belongs to everyone, and I'm merely borrowing it myself." She returned to her flowers, but he noticed she kept him in her peripheral vision, the careful awareness of a woman accustomed to being alone in public spaces. He moved farther into the church, drawn by the warmth of the lamps she had lit against the gathering darkness. Water dripped from his coat onto the stone floor. "Those are lovely. Hawthorn and rowan, unless I'm mistaken." She looked up with surprise. "You know your autumn flora. I had a good teacher once." The memory brought a flicker of something across his face, quickly suppressed. Someone who believed that a gentleman's education should include the natural world, not just Latin and ledgers, a progressive philosophy. She stepped back to examine her arrangement, Most gentlemen I've encountered can barely distinguish an oak from an elm. Then you've encountered the wrong sort of gentleman." Something in his tone made her glance at him more carefully. In the lamplight she could see he was perhaps 30, with the kind of features that would be called handsome if they weren't so obviously marked by strain. His eyes were a deep grey, like the sea beyond the village, and they held a peculiar combination of intelligence and profound weariness. "I'm Catherine Wells," she said after a moment, making the decision to offer basic courtesy. "I'm governess to Reverend Whitby's children." "Alexander Hart," he replied, and if there was the slightest hesitation before the surname, she didn't notice. "I've just arrived in the village. I'm hoping to let a cottage for a few months, somewhere quiet. You've certainly chosen the right location for quiet. We're rather isolated here. The nearest town of any size is 15 miles inland." She finished with the flowers and began gathering her things. "What brings you to Whitmore Bay, Mr. Hart? We don't often see strangers, particularly not in autumn." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the simple altar as if seeking words he couldn't quite find. "I needed to be somewhere where no one knew me," he said finally. "Somewhere I could simply exist without the weight of expectations and obligations." "Does that sound terribly strange?" Catherine studied him with those perceptive eyes. "No," she said softly. "It sounds rather honest, actually. Most people would invent some picturesque story about seeking inspiration or recovering their health. I've had my fill of invented stories." The rain continued to hammer against the ancient windows. Catherine picked up her shawl. "There's a cottage that might suit you. Old Mrs. Pemberton passed away last spring, and her son has been trying to let her place. It's small, just at the edge of the village overlooking the sea. The furniture is simple but adequate. It sounds perfect. Might I impose on you to show me the way?" She hesitated, that ingrained caution again. But something in his manner, the obvious sincerity and the profound sadness that clung to him like his wet coat, made her relent. "The rain is lighter now. If we're quick, we can make it before it worsens again." They left the church together, Catherine leading the way down a narrow lane that curved along the cliff edge. The cottage came into view after a few minutes' walk, a small stone structure with a slate roof, a single chimney, and windows that looked directly out over the churning grey sea. "The key is kept at the post office," Catherine explained, raising her voice over the wind. "Mr. Davies handles the letting, but I can show you the exterior at least." They stood before the cottage, and Alexander felt something in his chest ease for the first time in months. It was perfect. Utterly unpretentious, isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to the village for supplies. A place where the Duke of Thornfield could cease to exist, where only Alexander Hart need remain. "I'll take it," he said. Catherine laughed, startled. "Don't you want to see the interior? Discuss the terms? I'm sure whatever Mr. Davies asks will be reasonable, and I can see everything I need from here." He turned to her and she was struck by the intensity in his eyes. "This is exactly what I've been searching for, Miss Wells. A place to be simply myself, without pretense or performance." Something in his words resonated with her, touched some corresponding loneliness in her own heart. "I understand that feeling more than you might think, Mr. Hart, do you?" He studied her face. "What brings a woman of obvious education and refinement to serve as a governess in such an isolated village? The same thing that brings a gentleman of obvious breeding to hide in a cottage by the sea, I imagine. The desire to be valued for what I am, rather than what I lack." She pulled her shawl tighter against the wind. "I should return. The children will be finishing their afternoon lessons with their mother, and I'll be needed for supper preparations." "Of course. Thank you for your kindness, Miss Wells. In showing me the cottage, and in not pressing me with questions I'm not ready to answer." She smiled, and it transformed her face entirely. "We all have our reasons for seeking quiet corners of the world, Mr. Hart. I suspect yours are your own business." He watched her walk back toward the village, her grey dress disappearing into the mist and rain. Then he turned to look at the cottage again, at the wild sea beyond, at the empty sky where gulls wheeled and cried. In London, at this very moment, his mother would be demanding to know his whereabouts. His secretary would be frantically managing his correspondence. Lady Victoria Pemberton would be planning their wedding with her usual cold efficiency, discussing guest lists and floral arrangements for a union he had never wanted. But here, In this forgotten corner of England, he was simply Alexander Hart, a man without a title, without estates, without the crushing weight of duty and expectation, a man who might just possibly discover who he actually was beneath all the inherited obligations. He didn't yet know that in seeking to escape his life, he would find something far more dangerous, a reason to want to live. And he certainly didn't know that the quiet governess, with the intelligent eyes and the understanding smile, would be the one to give it to him. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Alexander secured the cottage from Mr. Davies at the post office, a transaction that took mere minutes and required no references beyond his ability to pay 3 months in advance. By afternoon, he had moved his single bag into the front room, built a fire in the small hearth and stood at the window watching fishing boats return to the harbour. A knock at the door surprised him. He opened it to find Catherine Wells standing on his doorstep, accompanied by 2 children, a girl of perhaps 8 and a boy of 10. "Mr. Hart," Catherine said with a slight smile, "I hope we're not disturbing you. The children insisted on welcoming you to the village properly, and Mrs. Whitby sent some bread and preserves from the vicarage kitchen." The little girl thrust a basket toward him. "Mama says it's Christian duty to welcome strangers," she announced. "I'm Sarah and this is Thomas, and Miss Wells says you know about flowers." Alexander couldn't help but smile, the first genuine smile that had crossed his face in weeks. "I know a little about flowers. Would you like to come in? Though I'm afraid I have nothing to offer you in return. I haven't yet stocked my kitchen." "We can't stay long," Catherine said, "but the children were curious about our new neighbour, and I confess I wanted to ensure you'd settled in adequately." They entered the small cottage, and Alexander was suddenly acutely aware of how modest it was. 2 rooms in total, the main living area with its fireplace and simple furniture, and a small bedroom barely large enough for the narrow bed it contained. The Duke of Thornfield's dressing room alone was larger than this entire dwelling, and yet he felt more at home here than he ever had in Thornfield House. "It's cosy," Sarah declared, examining everything with a child's frank curiosity. "Do you live all alone? Don't you have a family?" "Sarah," Catherine said gently, "remember what we discussed about polite questions." "It's quite all right," Alexander said. "I do live alone, Sarah. My family is in London, and I needed some time away from them." "Don't you like them?" Thomas asked, joining his sister in her inspection of the cottage. "I love them very much, but sometimes people need space to think, to understand themselves better. Do you understand?" Thomas considered this seriously. "Like when Sarah and I fight and Mama makes us go to separate rooms until we can be civil again?" Catherine looked mortified, but Alexander laughed. "Yes, rather like that. Except the room I've chosen has a much better view." He moved to the window and gestured for the children to join him. "Look there. Do you see how the light hits the water? In London, all I could see from my window was other buildings, other windows, other people all pressed together. Here, there's space to breathe." "Miss Wells takes us for nature walks," Sarah informed him. "She teaches us about birds and plants and the tides. Mama says it's not proper curriculum, but Papa allows it because Miss Wells makes us write compositions about what we observe. Your Miss Wells sounds like an excellent teacher." Catherine, who had been straightening the few items on his mantel, turned at this. "I believe education should engage all the senses, Mr. Hart. Books are wonderful, but children learn better when they can connect knowledge to direct experience, a philosophy I heartily endorse." He looked at her across the small room. "I don't suppose you'd allow me to join one of these nature walks. I find I've forgotten much of what I once knew and could benefit from a refresher course." The children's eyes lit up immediately. "Oh, could he, Miss Wells? Could Mr. Hart come on our walk tomorrow?" Catherine hesitated, but something in his expression, an almost pleading quality beneath the polite request, made her acquiesce. "If Mr. Hart wishes to tramp about the cliffs in pursuit of botanical education, I suppose we could accommodate him. We leave at 2 o'clock from the vicarage gate. I'll be there." After they left, Alexander stood in his cottage and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. Not the dreaded anticipation of social obligations or parliamentary sessions, but genuine eagerness for something simple and real. A walk along the cliffs with 2 curious children and their thoughtful governess. He had come to Whitmore Bay to hide from his life. He had no idea he was about to discover one worth living, but the lies that made this new life possible would eventually destroy it, and everyone he came to love would pay the price of his deception. The price would be higher than he could ever have imagined. The autumn weeks passed in a rhythm that Alexander had never known existed. In London, time had been measured by social calendars, parliamentary sessions, estate meetings, and endless obligations that marched forward with relentless precision. Here in Whitmore Bay, time moved with the tides, the weather, the cycles of the natural world that Catherine taught the children to observe. He joined their walks 3 times a week, and those afternoons became the center around which his new life revolved. "Notice the color of the lichen on these rocks," Catherine said one afternoon, crouched beside a tidal pool with Thomas and Sarah clustered around her. Alexander stood slightly apart, watching her teach with the kind of focused attention he had once reserved for matters of state. "The orange indicates it's above the high tide line. Below you see the green and brown varieties that can tolerate regular submersion." "How do they survive being covered by the sea?" Sarah asked, touching the crusty orange growth with gentle fingers. "They've adapted," Catherine explained. "They can dry out completely and then revive when moisture returns. It's rather remarkable when you think about it. Such a small, simple organism, but perfectly designed for its environment." "Not simple," Alexander said quietly. "Complex in its simplicity. The best designs often are." Catherine glanced up at him, and something passed between them in that look. Understanding, recognition, the sense that they were speaking about more than lichen. "Mr. Hart is quite right," she said to the children. "Simple doesn't mean unsophisticated. Nature teaches us that elegance often lies in doing one thing extraordinarily well rather than many things adequately." Thomas had wandered to another pool. "Miss Wells, there's a crab here, a huge one." As the children rushed to investigate, Catherine and Alexander found themselves alone for a moment, standing on the windswept rocks with the sea crashing below. "You have a gift for this," he said, "for making them see the world with curiosity rather than mere observation." "I want them to understand that knowledge isn't just facts to be memorized," she replied, tucking a strand of hair back into her knot as the wind tried to pull it free. "It's a way of engaging with the world, of finding wonder in the ordinary." "Where did you learn to teach this way?" Her expression became distant. "My father was a naturalist. Not a successful one, I'm afraid. He spent more time studying tide pools and bird migrations than securing his financial future. When he died, he left me with an excellent education and almost nothing else. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He gave me something more valuable than money. He taught me to see." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Sadness. "Though I confess there are moments when a bit more practicality in his nature might have been helpful. Being a governess wasn't precisely the future I had envisioned." "What did you envision?" She was quiet for a moment, watching the children. "I had rather ambitious dreams once. I wanted to write, to publish papers on natural history. My father encouraged it, insisted that my sex shouldn't limit my intellectual pursuits. But after he died, I discovered that the world cares very much about such limitations. No journal would consider work by a woman with no academic credentials, no male sponsor, no fortune to lend her respectability. So you became a governess." "I became a governess," she confirmed, "and I've made my peace with it. The Whitbys are kind employers. The children are bright and eager, and I have my evenings to myself. I write still, though I no longer harbor illusions about publication." "What do you write?" She looked at him with surprise. "You're the first person to ask me that. Most people, when they learn I write, immediately ask why I bother if I can't publish. Then most people are fools. Writing for oneself is reason enough." Catherine studied his face with those perceptive eyes. "You're not what you seem, are you, Mr. Hart?" His heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "Your education is far beyond what you've claimed. The way you speak, the references you make, your familiarity with literature and philosophy. You said you were a simple gentleman of modest means, but everything about you suggests otherwise." He should have deflected, changed the subject, laughed it off. Instead, he found himself saying, "Perhaps I'm trying to become what I claimed rather than what I was. Is that so terrible?" "No," she said softly. It's rather brave, actually. Most people spend their lives pretending to be more than they are. There's something honest in choosing to be less. The children's voices called them back, and the moment passed. But that evening, alone in his cottage, Alexander sat by his window and thought about her words. Honest in choosing to be less, but was it honest? He was living the grandest lie of his life, pretending to be ordinary when he was anything but. Yet the man he was becoming here felt more real than the Duke had ever been. The following week brought rain, forcing their lessons indoors. Catherine asked if they might use his cottage for a drawing lesson, as the vicarage was crowded with visiting relatives and the church was occupied with choir practice. "Of course," Alexander said, "though I'm afraid my artistic abilities are severely limited." "Then you'll learn alongside the children," Catherine declared, arriving with her charges and an impressive array of drawing supplies. "We're studying perspective today. The view from your window will be perfect." They arranged themselves around the small table, and Catherine began explaining the principles of vanishing points and horizon lines. Alexander found himself genuinely struggling with the concepts. His attempts at rendering the seascape resulting in comically distorted boats and improbable cliffs. Sarah giggled at his drawing. "Mr. Hart, your boat looks drunk." "It does rather, doesn't it?" He examined his work ruefully. "Perhaps the sea is very rough." "Here," Catherine said, moving to stand behind him. She reached over his shoulder to guide his pencil, her hand warm over his. "You're thinking too hard. Let your eye follow the line naturally. See where the horizon meets the sky? Everything else relates to that point." He was acutely aware of her proximity, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her dress, the way her voice softened when she was teaching. "Like this?" he asked, following her guidance. "Better. Much better. You see, you were overcomplicating it." "I have a tendency to do that," he murmured. She stepped back, but not before he felt the brief pressure of her hand on his shoulder. Professional, instructional, but it sent warmth through him nonetheless. That evening, after the children had gone home with their drawings, Catherine lingered. "Thank you for allowing us to invade your sanctuary," she said, gathering her supplies. "It's no invasion. I enjoyed it immensely." He paused. "You mentioned you write in your evenings. What are you working on currently?" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. From her bag she withdrew a leather journal. Stories mostly, observations of village life, character sketches, attempts at fiction. Nothing terribly sophisticated, may I? He held out his hand for the journal. Another hesitation, longer this time. Sharing one's writing was an act of profound vulnerability, but something in his expression, his genuine interest, made her hand it over. He read in silence for several minutes while she stood by the window, feigning interest in the darkening sea, but clearly nervous. The writing was good, very good. Sharp observations rendered in clean, elegant prose. A story about a fisherman's widow that captured both the harshness of coastal life and the resilience of the human spirit. "Catherine," he said finally, using her Christian name without thinking. "This is remarkable, truly remarkable." She turned, and he saw vulnerability in her face. "You're not simply being kind. I'm being honest. You have real talent. The characterization, the sense of place, the emotional truth of it. These should be published. Should be and can be are different things, Mr. Hart. Alexander, please, if I'm to call you Catherine, you should call me Alexander." The use of their given names felt like crossing a threshold, establishing an intimacy that went beyond casual acquaintance. Catherine seemed to feel it too, for she colored slightly. "Alexander, then. But the point remains. No publisher will consider work by an unknown governess. Then we'll find a way around that." He was already thinking, planning. His connections in London, the literary journals that would accept work at his recommendation. But he couldn't use those connections as Alexander Hart. What if you published under a masculine pseudonym? It's not uncommon, I've considered it. But without contacts in the publishing world, I wouldn't know where to begin. I might be able to help with that. I have some acquaintance with the literary world. It was true enough. The Duke of Thornfield sat on the board of several cultural institutions and knew half the publishers in London personally. Would you trust me with some of your work? I could make inquiries on your behalf. her eyes lit with hope, quickly tempered by caution. "You would do that? But why? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said quietly. "I know you're brilliant and talented and deserving of an audience beyond 2 children and their somewhat inept pupil." He smiled. "And perhaps I'd like to feel useful again, to help someone achieve something meaningful. What did you do, Alexander, before you came here to hide?" The question hung in the air between them. He could deflect again, maintain the careful fiction. But her honesty deserved honesty in return, even if he couldn't give her the complete truth. "I worked in service to others," he said finally. "Important work, necessary work, but work that left very little room for my own thoughts or desires. I made decisions that affected many lives, carried responsibilities I hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. And I did it for so long that I forgot who I might be if I could choose my own path. That sounds lonely. It was. It is." He met her eyes. "Until I came here and met a governess who sees wonder in lichen and writes beautiful stories by candlelight and treats me like a person rather than a position. I don't know your position." "Exactly." Understanding dawned in her expression. "That's what you needed, isn't it? To be unknown, to be valued for yourself alone." "Yes." The word came out rough with emotion. "And you've given me that, Catherine. You and the children and this simple life. You've given me something I didn't even know I was desperate for." She moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "What will you do when you have to return? You will have to return eventually, won't you? People like us don't get to hide forever. People like us. People with obligations. Duties we didn't choose but can't abandon." She smiled sadly. "You think I don't recognize a fellow prisoner of responsibility? I see it in your eyes every time you watch the London coach arrive. Part of you dreading the day it brings someone looking for you. Part of you knowing that day will inevitably come." He wanted to tell her then, wanted to explain about Thornfield, about his mother and the estates and Lady Victoria Pemberton and all of it. But the words stuck in his throat, held back by cowardice and the terrible fear that if she knew the truth, this fragile connection would shatter. Instead, he said, "Then let's make the most of whatever time we have. Let me help you with your writing. Let's continue our walks with the children. Let's be simply Alexander and Catherine, 2 people who found friendship in an isolated village for as long as we're able. Friends," she repeated softly. "Is that what we are?" The question held layers of meaning. They both felt it, the pull between them that went beyond friendship. But to acknowledge it would be to cross another line, one that could only lead to pain. "For now," he said. "Friends for now." She nodded, though something in her eyes suggested she understood what he wasn't saying. "Then, as your friend, I should tell you that you're invited to supper at the vicarage tomorrow. Mrs. Whitby has been asking about you, and I think she wants to assess whether you're a suitable addition to village society. Am I being vetted?" "Thoroughly. Small villages take their social cohesion very seriously. You'll be questioned about your background, your intentions, and your religious observance. How terrifying. Will you rescue me if I say something unforgivably urbane?" She laughed. "I'll do my best, though I warn you Mrs. Whitby is formidable when she sets her mind to interrogation. The supper proved both charming and excruciating. Mrs. Whitby was indeed formidable, a woman of strong opinions and stronger curiosity. Reverend Whitby was gentler, genuinely interested in Alexander's thoughts on theology and philosophy. The children were delighted to have him at their table, and Catherine, seated across from him, caught his eye whenever Mrs. Whitby's questions became particularly pointed, her slight smile giving him courage. "And your family, Mr. Hart?" Mrs. Whitby asked over the fish course. "You mentioned they're in London. What is their business?" "Land management, primarily," Alexander said, which was technically true, estates and agricultural concerns. "And you have no desire to join them in this work?" "I needed a respite, Mrs. Whitby. The work is demanding, and I found myself losing perspective on what truly matters." "Which is?" He glanced at Catherine. "Human connection, beauty, the opportunity to think one's own thoughts rather than simply executing the thoughts of others." Mrs. Whitby harumphed, but seemed somewhat mollified. "Well, we have an abundance of beauty here, if not much else. "I hope you find what you're searching for, Mr. Hart." "I believe I already have," he said quietly. After supper, Catherine walked him to the vicarage gate. The night was clear, stars brilliant over the dark sea. "You handled her admirably," Catherine said. "I think you've passed inspection. Only because you were there. I kept looking to you for reassurance." "Did you?" She seemed pleased by this admission. "I didn't notice." "Liar, you notice everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the distant sound of waves. "Alexander," she said finally, "whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, I want you to know that I'm glad you came. These past weeks have been wonderful. The children adore you, and I've enjoyed our conversations more than I can adequately express, as have I. More than you know." "I think I do know." She turned to face him fully. "I think we're both lonely people who found something unexpected in each other. I don't know what that something is, or what it might become. But I'm grateful for it." He wanted to kiss her. The desire was so strong, it ached. But he couldn't, not yet. Not while so many lies stood between them. "Good night, Catherine." "Good night, Alexander." He walked back to his cottage under the brilliant stars and knew with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with her. Not the polite affection he was supposed to feel for Lady Victoria, not the dutiful emotion appropriate to an arranged aristocratic union. Real love, devastating, transforming, impossible love. And he had no idea how it could possibly end in anything but heartbreak. In London, 300 miles away, his secretary James Blackwood was methodically working through every possible location the Duke might have fled to. It was only a matter of time before the trail led to Whitmore Bay. The borrowed piece of Alexander Hart's life was already measured in weeks, perhaps days. But for now he had this: starlight and sea air and the memory of Catherine's smile. For now it was enough. It would have to be. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it storms that battered the coast and kept the fishing boats in harbour for days at a time. Alexander found he didn't mind the isolation. The worse the weather, the more justification he had to spend long hours in the warmth of the vicarage, ostensibly helping Catherine with the children's lessons, but really just existing in her presence. They had fallen into an easy intimacy that felt both natural and precious. He would arrive mid-morning, and they would work together, teaching the children mathematics, literature, and natural philosophy. Catherine had a gift for making even the driest subjects engaging, and Alexander found himself rediscovering the joy of learning he had lost somewhere in his rigidly formal education. "The key to understanding mathematics," Catherine explained to Thomas one snowy December morning, "is to see the patterns. Numbers aren't arbitrary. They follow rules, create relationships. Look here." She drew a series of geometric shapes on her slate. Each shape relates to the next in a predictable way. "Can you see it?" Thomas frowned in concentration. Alexander, watching from across the table where he was helping Sarah with her composition, felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. This was what life should be. Not grand balls and political maneuvering, not the cold calculation of advantageous marriages and estate management. Just this: the patient teaching of eager minds, the warmth of a fire, the sound of wind and waves outside, and the presence of a woman who made him want to be better than he was. "Mr. Hart." Sarah tugged at his sleeve. "You're not paying attention. I asked if beautiful has one L or two. 2 L's, 1 T, he said automatically, then refocused on her paper. "My apologies, Sarah. I was wool gathering." "You do that a lot," she observed with a child's frankness. "Mama says it means you're thinking deep thoughts. Are you thinking deep thoughts?" "Extremely deep," he said solemnly. "I was contemplating the nature of happiness." "And what did you conclude?" Catherine asked from across the room, amusement in her voice. "That it's far simpler than I always believed." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Mrs. Whitby, entering with tea, cleared her throat meaningfully. "Mr. Hart, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time these past months. The children have benefited immensely from your assistance. But I wonder if we're perhaps imposing on your hospitality." It was delicately done, but the message was clear. The vicar's wife had noticed the growing connection between her governess and their mysterious lodger, and she wasn't entirely comfortable with it. "Not at all, Mrs. Whitby," Alexander said smoothly. "I find teaching remarkably fulfilling. It's given purpose to my days here. Still, a gentleman of your obvious education must have other pursuits. Don't you find village life rather limiting?" Catherine's posture had stiffened slightly. She knew what Mrs. Whitby was doing, protecting her employee from potential impropriety or heartbreak. "On the contrary," Alexander said, "I find it liberating. In cities, one is surrounded by people but profoundly alone. Here, genuine human connection is still possible." Mrs. Whitby pursed her lips but said nothing more. The rest of the lesson proceeded with slight tension in the air. When it concluded, Catherine walked Alexander to the door as usual, but her manner was subdued. "You don't have to continue coming," she said quietly, once they were alone in the hall. "Mrs. Whitby is right. People will talk if they haven't already. It's not proper for a governess to spend so much time with an unmarried gentleman. Do you want me to stop coming?" "No." The word came quickly, almost desperately. "But what I want and what's prudent are different things. I have my reputation to consider, my position here. Then I'll be more circumspect. I'll vary my visits, ensure we're never alone without the children present. Alexander." She looked up at him, conflict clear in her expression. "Why are you really here? In Whitmore Bay, spending your days helping teach children, befriending a governess. You're educated, clearly from a good family, not without means. You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why here? Why this?" "Because here I can pretend to be someone worthy of you," he thought, but didn't say. "Because in London I'm promised to a woman I don't love, living a life I never chose, and you're the first real thing I've felt in years. Because here I'm happy," he said instead. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I wake up looking forward to the day rather than dreading it. Is that not reason enough? And when you leave, when whatever you're hiding from catches up with you, and you return to your real life, what then?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm trying not to think about it." "Well, I am thinking about it." Her voice was fierce now, almost angry. "Because when you leave, I'll still be here. Still teaching the children, still writing my stories that no one will publish, still living a quiet life in a quiet village. And I'll have the memory of these months to haunt me, reminding me of something I can't have. Catherine, no, let me finish. I need to say this while I still have the courage." She took a breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Alexander Hart. I've tried not to. I've told myself 100 times that it's foolish, that you're clearly running from something or someone, that this can only end badly. But I can't seem to help it, and I need to know if I'm alone in this feeling or if you—" She trailed off, waiting. He should have lied, should have gently extracted himself, protected her from the inevitable pain. Instead, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was everything a first kiss should be. Tender and desperate, cautious and consuming. She made a small sound of surprise that became something else entirely, her hands coming up to clutch his coat as if to steady herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "You're not alone," he whispered. "God help us both, you're not alone in this. Alone." They stood there in the dim hallway, holding each other, while outside the December wind howled and snow began to fall. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat in his cottage, staring at the dying fire, trying to think of a way forward that didn't end in catastrophe. He loved Catherine. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. He loved her intelligence, her passion for teaching, her quiet strength. He loved the way she saw the world, the stories she wrote, the kindness she showed the children. He loved who he was when he was with her, but he was engaged to another woman. He was the Duke of Thornfield, with responsibilities to thousands of people who depended on his estates for their livelihoods. He had a seat in Parliament, political obligations, family expectations that went back generations. How could he possibly reconcile the man he was becoming with the man he was born to be? The answer came to him as dawn broke over the winter sea. He couldn't reconcile them. He would have to choose. And if he chose Catherine, chose this life, he would be abandoning everything and everyone who depended on him. His mother would be devastated. Lady Victoria would be humiliated. The political alliances built on their marriage would crumble. His estates would suffer without his management. But if he chose duty, returned to London and married Victoria as expected, he would lose the only woman he had ever truly loved. He would spend the rest of his life wondering what might have been, trapped in a loveless marriage, forever haunted by the memory of these months in Whitmore Bay. It was an impossible choice, unless he could find a way to have both. The idea formed slowly, audaciously. What if he simply didn't return? What if the Duke of Thornfield disappeared permanently, and Alexander Hart remained? His estates were well managed by capable stewards. His younger brother Edward could inherit, would probably do a better job of it anyway. His mother would grieve but eventually accept. Lady Victoria would be briefly scandalized, but would quickly find another advantageous match. He could marry Catherine. They could live quietly here, or perhaps move to another village where no one knew either of them. He had enough money set aside in private accounts to support them comfortably if not lavishly. She could publish her stories. He could teach. They could be happy. It was wildly irresponsible, selfish beyond measure, a complete abdication of duty. It was also, he realized, exactly what he wanted. Over the following weeks he began to plan. He wrote to his private banker in London, arranging for the transfer of personal funds to an account accessible only to him. He drafted a letter to his brother, explaining everything, to be sent only when he was ready to make the break final. He began imagining a future with Catherine that felt possible, real within reach. Christmas came and the village celebrated with simple joy. Alexander attended services at St. Mary by the sea, standing beside Catherine in the packed church, their shoulders touching. The children performed a nativity play that was endearingly chaotic. Mrs. Whitby served a feast at the vicarage that included half the village. It was the best Christmas Alexander had ever known. On New Year's Eve, he invited Catherine to his cottage. She came after the children were asleep, wrapped in a thick cloak against the bitter cold. Snow was falling softly, muffling all sound. "This is terribly improper," she said, but she was smiling as he drew her inside. "I know. I don't care anymore." He took her cloak, then her hands. "Catherine, I need to tell you something, to ask you something." She searched his face. "You're frightening me. Don't be frightened. Just listen." He led her to the small sofa before the fire. "I came here 6 months ago trying to escape a life I didn't want. I thought I just needed time, space to think. But I've discovered something far more important. I've discovered who I actually am, who I want to be. And that person only exists because of you. Alexander, let me finish. Please." He took a breath. "My real life, the one I left behind in London, involves obligations I was born into rather than chose. Important responsibilities, yes, but ones that have made me miserable. I've spent 30 years being who others expected me to be, and I was slowly dying inside. What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've made a decision. I'm not going back. I'm going to remain here as Alexander Hart, permanently. I'll sever all connections to my former life, and I'm asking you—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring he had commissioned from the village jeweler. "I'm asking you to marry me." Catherine stared at the ring, her expression unreadable. "You want to marry me? More than I've ever wanted anything. But your family, your obligations in London, will survive without me, better than I would survive without you." He took her hand. "Catherine, I love you. I love everything about you. I love your mind, your heart, your passion for teaching and writing and seeing beauty in the ordinary. I love who I am when I'm with you. And I want to spend the rest of my life being that person, being your husband, building a simple, honest life together." Tears were streaming down her face. "I'm a governess. I have no fortune, no connections, nothing to offer you. You're offering me everything that matters: love, partnership, a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't duty or obligation but genuine joy. People will ask questions about your background, your family. Then we'll move to another village, start fresh, where no one knows either of us. I have enough money to support us comfortably. You can publish your stories under whatever name you choose. We'll live quietly, honestly, together." She was crying in earnest now. "You would give up your entire life for me. I would give up a life I never wanted for the only life I've ever chosen. There's a difference." He slipped the ring onto her finger. "Marry me, Catherine, please." For a long moment she just looked at the ring on her hand, then at his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she whispered against his shoulder. "Yes, yes, yes." They held each other while the fire crackled and snow fell outside and the old year gave way to the new. Alexander felt happiness so intense it was almost painful. This was right. This was real. Everything else had been the lie. They made plans in hushed, excited voices. A quiet wedding at St. Mary by the Sea in February. Then they would move, perhaps to Devon or Cornwall, somewhere coastal where Catherine could continue her nature studies and he could find work teaching. They would live simply but well. They would be happy. "I can't believe this is happening," Catherine said, still staring at her ring. "It feels like a fairy tale. The best fairy tales are the ones that come true." She kissed him then, and it was different from their first kiss. This one held promise, commitment, the beginning of forever. But forever, Alexander would soon discover, was not theirs to claim. The knock came at precisely 9 o'clock the following evening. Alexander was reading by his fire, Catherine having returned to the vicarage hours earlier, when the sharp rap on his door shattered the peaceful quiet. He opened it to find a man standing in the snow, tall and grim-faced, wearing the livery of the Thornfield household. "Your Grace," James Blackwood said, his voice heavy with relief and reproach, "I've been searching for you for 6 months." Alexander's blood went cold. "James, how did you find me?" Process of elimination, determination, and finally a tip from a coaching inn. "May I come in? What I have to say is not for the street." Numbly, Alexander stepped aside. His secretary entered, brushing snow from his coat, and took in the modest cottage with an expression that was almost pitying. "You've been living here? Like this? What do you want, James?" "To bring you home, Your Grace. To inform you that your mother is gravely ill and asking for you. To tell you that Lady Victoria has been extraordinarily patient, but is beginning to ask questions that are becoming difficult to answer. To remind you that you have responsibilities that cannot be indefinitely postponed. I'm not coming back." James stared at him. "I beg your pardon? I'm not returning to London. I've built a life here. I'm engaged to be married. I'm staying." "Engaged?" James's expression shifted from shock to horror. "To whom?" "Please tell me not to some local girl who has no idea who you actually are. Her name is Catherine Wells. She's a governess, and she's the woman I love. Does she know you're the Duke of Thornfield?" Alexander's silence was answer enough. "Dear God," James breathed. "You've built this entire life on a lie. What did you tell her? Who does she think you are? A gentleman of modest means named Alexander Hart. And when were you planning to reveal the truth? On your wedding night? When she reads about the missing Duke in the papers, I was going to tell her. Soon. I just needed to find the right moment." "There is no right moment for this kind of deception, Your Grace." James's voice was gentler now. "You know that. And you know you cannot marry this woman under false pretenses. It would be illegal, for one thing. The marriage would be invalid. And when she discovers the truth, as she inevitably must, she will hate you for it. She loves me. She loves Alexander Hart. She has no idea who the Duke of Thornfield is, what responsibilities come with that title, what kind of life you would be asking her to enter. You've fallen in love with her under false circumstances. The relationship is built on deception, however well-intentioned." Alexander sank into his chair, the weight of reality crushing down on him. "What about my mother? Truly ill." "The physicians are concerned. She's been asking for you daily." James paused. "She's also been working with the Pemberton family to finalize wedding arrangements. The ceremony is scheduled for April at St. George's in London. The invitations are already printed. Then she can unprint them, can she? Your Grace, I've served your family for 15 years. I know you never wanted this life, never wanted the title or the responsibilities. But you have them nonetheless. Thousands of people depend on the Thornfield estates for their livelihoods. Your voice in Parliament influences policy that affects millions. Your marriage to Lady Victoria will secure political alliances that matter. What about what matters to me? With respect, Your Grace, you are the Duke of Thornfield. What matters to you cannot be separated from what you owe to others." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire burning down to embers. "I love her, James," Alexander said finally, his voice breaking. "I genuinely love her. Not duty, not obligation. Love. I believe you. But you've loved her as a lie. You've let her fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. And now you must choose. Tell her the truth and face the consequences, or disappear from her life and let her believe Alexander Hart simply left. Both options destroy her. Yes, James agreed quietly. They do. That's the price of your deception, Your Grace. Not your price. Hers. Alexander buried his face in his hands. Through the window he could see lights in the vicarage where Catherine was probably writing, probably dreaming about their future together, probably looking at her ring and smiling. In 6 months he had built a beautiful lie, and now it was all about to come crashing down. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Your mother is asking for you. I promise to return with you within the week." A week. 7 days to find a way to tell the woman he loved that everything she believed about him was false. 7 days to decide between the life he wanted and the life he was obligated to live. 7 days until Alexander Hart had to die and the Duke of Thornfield had to return. "She deserves the truth," Alexander said. "I have to tell her everything." "Yes," James said, "you do. But I warn you, Your Grace, the truth is going to break her heart. It's going to break both our hearts." But he didn't yet know how completely, how devastatingly, how irreparably the truth would shatter everything they had built. He didn't know that the worst was still to come. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat by his window watching the dark sea, the ring box he had prepared for Catherine sitting on the table beside him, a cruel reminder of the happiness he had dared to imagine. James had taken a room at the inn, giving Alexander until morning to begin facing what must be done. But how did one begin to dismantle a beautiful lie? He decided the only way was cleanly, completely, all at once. He would tell Catherine everything. His title, his responsibilities, his engagement to Lady Victoria, the 6 months of deception. He would beg her forgiveness, while knowing he didn't deserve it. And then he would offer her a choice. Come with him to London. Face the scandal, the social destruction, the fury of his family. Let him break his engagement, weather the consequences and marry her instead. It would be brutal. The aristocracy would never accept her. His mother would be apoplectic. The political damage would be severe. But it was possible. Difficult, painful, but possible. He clung to that hope as dawn broke cold and grey over Whitmore Bay. Catherine arrived at his cottage at their usual morning hour, her face bright with happiness, clearly having spent the night making her own plans for their future. She held a sheaf of papers. "I've been writing," she said, kissing him in greeting with the easy affection of the newly engaged. "Ideas for stories set in Devon. I thought perhaps we could visit before we settle there, get a sense of the landscape. And I've been thinking about the school we discussed. If we're careful with money, we might be able to—" "Catherine." His voice stopped her. "We need to talk." She heard something in his tone that made her smile fade. "What's wrong? Please, sit down." She sank onto the sofa, her papers forgotten in her lap, fear beginning to show in her eyes. "You're frightening me, Alexander." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He knelt before her, taking her hands. "Catherine, I haven't been honest with you. About who I am, where I come from, what my life was before I came here." "I know you've been hiding something," she said carefully. "I've always known. But I thought when you were ready you would tell me. I should have told you from the beginning. I should never have let this go so far without telling you." He took a shaky breath. "My name isn't Alexander Hart. It's Alexander Hartley. And I'm not a simple gentleman of modest means. I'm the Duke of Thornfield." The words hung in the air between them. Catherine stared at him, her expression uncomprehending. "The Duke of Thornfield," she repeated slowly. "As in, one of the wealthiest peers in England?" "That Duke of Thornfield?" "Yes." She pulled her hands from his, standing abruptly. "You're a duke? You've been living in this cottage, teaching children, courting me, all while being a duke? I needed to escape. The pressure, the expectations, the life I never chose. I came here to be someone else, someone simpler. And then I met you, and everything changed." "Everything changed," she echoed, her voice rising. "So, you decided to keep lying? To let me fall in love with Alexander Hart while Alexander Hartley was the whole time? The man you fell in love with is real, Catherine. My feelings are real." Only the name was false, only the name. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You lied about everything. Your circumstances, your obligations, your entire life. Who are you engaged to marry, Alexander? Because dukes don't remain unmarried at 30 without a very good reason. He closed his eyes. Lady Victoria Pemberton. It was arranged years ago. I never wanted it. Never loved her. But you're still engaged to her. You proposed to me while engaged to another woman. I was going to break the engagement. I am going to break it. When? After you married me under a false name. After I discovered I was a duke's mistress rather than his wife. Her hands were shaking. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That we could just live quietly in Devon and no one would ever recognize the Duke of Thornfield? I thought I could give it up. The title, the estates, all of it. My brother could inherit. I could just be Alexander Hart with you. You can't give up being a duke, you fool. She was crying now, angry tears streaming down her face. It doesn't work that way. You have responsibilities, people who depend on you. And even if you could abandon all of that, which is monstrously selfish, I would spend the rest of my life knowing I was married to a lie, that the man I thought I knew never actually existed. He does exist. I'm more myself with you than I've ever been. No. She shook her head violently. You're a duke playing at being common. You're a rich man amusing himself with the fantasy of ordinary life. And I was part of that fantasy, wasn't I? The sweet, naive governess who fell for the gentleman with the mysterious past. How romantic. How perfectly quaint. It wasn't like that, wasn't it? She wiped at her tears furiously. Tell me, Alexander, in all these months, did you ever truly understand what my life is like? The constant worry about money, about security, about my reputation. Did you understand what it means to be dependent on the goodwill of employers, to have no power, no choices? Or were you just playing at poverty, knowing you could return to your life of privilege whenever you chose? I tried to understand. You can't understand. You were always safe, always secure in the knowledge that you had wealth and position to return to. I've been terrified my entire adult life, terrified of losing my position, of ending up destitute, of growing old, alone and poor. And I thought I had found someone who truly knew what that was like, who valued the same simple things I did because we were equals. Her voice broke. But we were never equals, were we? You were always the Duke, and I was always the foolish governess who didn't know better. Catherine, please, let me explain everything. My mother is ill. I have to return to London, but I want you to come with me. We can face this together. I'll break my engagement, deal with the scandal, and marry you properly. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, society will be cruel, but we love each other. Surely that matters more than anything else. She stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. You want me to come to London with you? To enter your world, face your aristocratic family and friends, and somehow transform from a governess into a duchess while everyone watches and judges and gossips about the scandalous duke who broke his engagement for a nobody. You're not a nobody. To them I am. To your world I'm less than nothing. I'm the social climbing governess who seduced a duke. She pulled off the ring he had given her and held it out. I won't be that woman, Alexander. I won't be pitied and scorned and held up as an example of improper ambition. I have my dignity, even if I have nothing else. Don't do this. He didn't take the ring. Catherine, I love you. I know I've handled this terribly. I know I should have told you from the beginning, but my feelings are genuine. Everything we shared was real, was it? How can I trust anything now? Every conversation we had, every moment we spent together, all of it happened while you were lying to me. You let me share my writing, my dreams, my fears, all while knowing you were deceiving me about the most fundamental facts of your existence. I was going to tell you. When? Before or after you married me under a false name? I don't know. The admission came out raw, desperate. I don't know what I was thinking. I was selfish and stupid, and so desperate to hold on to this happiness that I couldn't see how wrong it was. But Catherine, please, don't let my mistakes destroy what we have. What we have is based on lies. She pressed the ring into his hand, closing his fingers around it. The man I loved was gentle and kind, and understood the value of a simple life because he lived one. But that man doesn't exist. He was a character you created, a role you played. And I won't marry a character. I won't build my life on fiction. Then let me show you the real me. Come to London, see my life, let me prove that the essential man is the same whether he's called Hart or Hartley. She shook her head slowly. You don't understand, do you? It's not about the name, it's about the betrayal. You made choices for both of us without giving me the information I needed to make my own choices. You let me believe we were building something together when really, you were building a fantasy for yourself. And now you expect me to just accept that, forgive it, and follow you into a world where I'll never belong. You would belong because you'd be with me. No, Alexander. I'd be tolerated because I was with you. There's a difference. She moved toward the door, gathering her cloak. I need you to leave Whitmore Bay, today. I can't see you again, can't bear to look at you and remember how completely I was fooled. Catherine, wait. Please. At least let me apologize properly. Let me try to make this right. She turned at the door, and the look she gave him was devastating in its finality. You can't make it right. You can't undo 6 months of deception with an apology. You can't transform me into someone who could survive in your world. And you can't become the simple man I thought you were, because he never existed in the first place. He did exist. He does. I swear to you, the man who walked the cliffs with you, who taught the children, who read your stories and fell in love with your mind and heart, that man is real. Then he's buried so deep under the Duke of Thornfield that I'll never find him again. Tears were streaming down her face, unchecked now. Go back to London, Alexander. Marry your Lady Victoria. Live the life you were born to live. And let me keep my memories of Alexander Hart, the man who never was but who I loved anyway. I won't marry Victoria. I can't. Not now. You will, she said with bitter certainty. Because when you're back in your world, surrounded by your responsibilities and obligations, you'll remember why you were engaged to her in the first place. You'll remember that you're the Duke of Thornfield, and dukes don't marry governesses, no matter what promises they made while pretending to be someone else. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Her voice rose to something close to a shout. It's not fair that you came here and made me love you. It's not fair that you gave me hope for a different future. It's not fair that you're going to go back to your privileged life while I stay here and try to piece together the wreckage of what I thought we had. But fairness has nothing to do with it. This is reality, Alexander. The reality you hid from me for 6 months. She left then, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. Alexander stood in his cottage, surrounded by the simple furnishings of the life he had built, the life that had just crumbled to dust. James found him there an hour later, still holding Catherine's ring. I take it she didn't respond well, the secretary said quietly. She hates me. She thinks everything was a lie. Was it? No, God, no. I love her, James. I truly love her. I believe you, but you loved her as someone you're not, or rather, as someone you can only be in stolen moments, not in real life. James sat down heavily. Your Grace, I've known you since you were 15. I've watched you struggle under the weight of your title, seen how it's crushed the joy out of you. I understand why you ran, why you tried to create a different life, but you were always going to have to come back. You know that. You've always known it, and you should never have involved that poor woman in your escape. I didn't plan to fall in love with her. That's not an excuse. You knew from the first moment you spoke to her under false pretenses that this could only end badly. And you pursued her anyway because you wanted what you wanted. James's voice was gentle but firm. That's the privilege of your position, Your Grace. You're so accustomed to getting what you want that it didn't occur to you to consider the cost to her. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. He had been selfish, monumentally selfish, in pursuing Catherine while hiding who he was. He had told himself he was protecting her, giving her the choice to love him for himself. But really he had been protecting himself, indulging in the fantasy of being loved without the burden of his title. What do I do now? You return to London. You attend to your mother. You fulfill your obligations to Lady Victoria and her family. You resume being the Duke of Thornfield because that's who you are, whether you like it or not. And Catherine? You leave her alone. You've done enough damage. Let her heal. Let her rebuild her life without you in it. James paused. Unless you're truly prepared to give up everything, to abdicate your responsibilities, destroy your family's reputation, create a scandal that would follow you both forever, and drag her into a world that will despise her for the rest of her life. Are you prepared for that? Alexander thought about his mother, frail and asking for him, his estates where thousands of families depended on the income from their work, his seat in Parliament, where his voice influenced policies that affected countless lives, his brother Edward, who had never wanted the title and would be devastated to have it thrust upon him, Lady Victoria, who didn't love him but had built her future around their marriage, the complex web of political alliances and social obligations that rested on his shoulders. Could he truly walk away from all of that? Could he ask Catherine to bear the weight of that decision with him? No, he whispered, I'm not prepared for that. God help me, I'm not. Then you know what you must do. Alexander looked out the window toward the vicarage, where Catherine was probably telling the children she had to leave, that she couldn't stay in Whitmore Bay knowing he was nearby. He had destroyed her peace, her security, her ability to remain in a position she valued. He had destroyed her just as thoroughly as she believed he had. I'll leave today, he said. Tell the coachman to prepare. I'll return to London with you. And Miss Wells? I won't contact her again, you're right, I've done enough damage. He set her ring on the table, that small circle of gold that represented all his broken promises. Make sure this is returned to her. And James, when we return to London, I want you to arrange something for me. What, Your Grace? An anonymous trust fund. Substantial enough to ensure she never has to worry about money again. Enough that she could stop being a governess if she wished, could focus on her writing, could have the independence and security I should have given her honestly from the beginning. She'll refuse it if she knows it's from you, then she must never know. Set it up through intermediaries. Make it seem like an inheritance from a distant relative or a patron who admired her father's work. Something she can accept without feeling like she's taking my money. It won't make up for what you've done, I know, but it's all I can give her now. Money is the one thing I have in abundance, even if it couldn't buy what I wanted most. He packed his single bag with hands that shook. The cottage that had been his sanctuary now felt like a tomb. Every object reminded him of Catherine, the table where they had taught the children, the window where they had watched storms together, the sofa where he had proposed to her just yesterday, when he had still believed happiness was possible. Before he left, he wrote her a letter. He tore it up. He wrote another. Tore it up. Finally, he wrote just 3 words on a piece of paper and left it on the table beside her ring. I am sorry. It was inadequate. It was pathetic. It was all he had. The London coach left Whitmore Bay at noon. Alexander looked back once as the village disappeared behind the curve of the coast. Somewhere in that cluster of buildings, Catherine was nursing her broken heart, hating him, trying to understand how she had been so thoroughly deceived. He wanted to tell himself that she would be better off, that the money he was leaving her would ease her pain. That time would heal this wound. But he knew better. He had seen the devastation in her eyes. He had destroyed something pure and real because he had been too selfish, too cowardly to either tell her the truth or walk away before she loved him. Your Grace, James said quietly, are you all right? No, Alexander said. I don't think I'll ever be all right again. The coach carried him away from the only happiness he had ever known, back toward a life of duty and obligation, and a loveless marriage to a woman he respected but could never love. In his pocket was the sketch Catherine had drawn of him during one of their lessons, the one she had given him shyly, saying it captured something essential about him. He pulled it out now, studying the face she had rendered with such care. It was Alexander Hart she had drawn, the gentle teacher, the thoughtful companion, the man who found joy in simple things. That man was dead now. Only the Duke of Thornfield remained. And he had never felt more like an impostor in his entire life. London enveloped Alexander like a suffocating fog. After 6 months of sea air and wide horizons, the city felt oppressive. The streets too narrow, the buildings too tall, the very air thick with coal smoke and the press of humanity. The ducal residence at Thornfield House loomed before him as the carriage pulled through the gates, its Portland stone facade gleaming pale in the winter afternoon. He had been gone 6 months. It felt like a lifetime. The household erupted at his arrival. Servants rushed to take his bag, looking shocked at how little he carried. The butler, Morrison, betrayed actual emotion for perhaps the first time in 40 years of service. "Your Grace, thank God you've returned. Her Grace has been quite distressed. How is my mother?" "Weakened considerably, Your Grace. The physicians have been attending her daily. She's in her rooms. She's been asking for you constantly." Alexander climbed the grand staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house was exactly as he had left it, opulent, tasteful, cold. Generations of Hartleys stared down at him from their portraits, a gallery of aristocratic disapproval. He felt their judgment even through oil and canvas. His mother's suite occupied the entire east wing. He knocked quietly and entered to find her propped up in her bed, thinner than he remembered, her iron-grey hair loose around her shoulders instead of its usual severe arrangement. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, and they fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like a child caught in some transgression. "Alexander." Her voice was weaker but no less commanding. "So you finally deign to return." "Mother." He crossed to her bedside, taking her hand. It felt fragile, bird-like. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for worrying you." "Worrying me? You disappeared without a word for 6 months. I thought you were dead. Or worse, that you had done something foolish and irreversible." She studied his face with the perception of someone who had known him his entire life. "You look different." "I am different. Where were you?" "A coastal village. Whitmore Bay. I needed to escape, to think." "And did you?" "Think, I mean." He thought of Catherine's face when she had discovered the truth, the devastation in her eyes. "Yes. Though I'm not sure my conclusions will please you. They rarely do." She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly. "Victoria has been remarkably patient, all things considered. Her family has been less so. The Pembertons are threatening to withdraw from the engagement entirely, if you don't set a firm wedding date." "Perhaps they should." His mother's eyes narrowed. "What did you do in this village, Alexander? And don't lie to me. I've been lied to enough these past months." So he told her. Not everything, but enough: the cottage, the simple life, the teaching, and Catherine. He told her about Catherine. When he finished, his mother was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You fell in love with a governess. I fell in love with an extraordinary woman who happened to be a governess. And you proposed to her while still engaged to Victoria." "Yes." "Did you tell this governess who you actually were?" "Not until yesterday, when James found me and told me you were ill." "So you deceived her for 6 months, proposed marriage under false pretenses, and then revealed yourself to be one of the most prominent peers in England, already engaged to another woman." His mother's voice was dry. "Tell me, Alexander, at what point in this sequence of events did you think it would end well?" "I loved her, Mother. I still love her. Love." She said the word as if it were a foreign concept. "Your father and I had what might be called an understanding. Mutual respect, shared goals, compatible temperaments. It served us well for 35 years. Love is what poets write about and fools pursue. Then I'm a fool." "Yes, you are. A selfish, thoughtless fool, who put his own desires above his responsibilities to this family, to his title, and apparently above any consideration for the woman he claims to love." Her voice was harsh, but there was something in her eyes that might have been sympathy. "What did this governess say when you told her the truth? She told me to leave, that everything we had was built on lies, that she wouldn't follow me to London and be destroyed by my world. She sounds remarkably sensible. She's heartbroken. So are you, apparently. And whose fault is that?" His mother closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "Alexander, I'm dying. The physicians won't say it directly, but I can feel it. I have perhaps 6 months, possibly less. Before I die, I need to know that the Thornfield legacy is secure, that you're settled with a suitable wife, that the estates will continue to be properly managed. Edward could inherit. Edward doesn't want it and would be miserable with it. You know that. He's an academic, happiest in libraries and laboratories. Forcing this life on him would be as cruel as you seem to find it. Then what do you suggest?" She opened her eyes and looked at him with something approaching gentleness. "I suggest you grow up, Alexander. You're 30 years old. You've had your rebellion, your adventure, your taste of ordinary life. Now it's time to accept who you are and what you owe to those who depend on you. And Catherine, your governess made the right choice in refusing you. Bringing her to London, making her a duchess, would have destroyed her eventually, if not immediately. The aristocracy would have eviscerated her. She would have been miserable, and you would have grown to resent her for the political damage the marriage caused. She was wise enough to see that, even if you weren't, so I should just forget her, pretend these 6 months never happened? No. You should remember them as a lesson in the consequences of deception and selfishness. And then you should do what you were born to do. Marry Victoria, manage your estates, take your seat in Parliament, and live the life of duty that is your inheritance. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens. In Whitmore Bay, the gardens were wild, shaped by wind and sea. Here everything was controlled, cultivated, appropriate. What if I can't, he said quietly. What if I can't marry Victoria knowing I love someone else? Then you do it anyway, because that's what being the Duke of Thornfield means. It means putting duty before desire, responsibility before personal happiness, the welfare of thousands before your own heart. She paused. It's what your father did, what his father did, what every Hartley has done for generations. Why should you be exempt because I've tasted something different? I've felt what it's like to be valued for myself rather than my title, to be loved by someone who saw me, really saw me, not the Duke but the man. And look how that ended, with both of you devastated, her life disrupted, her heart broken. Is that what love brings? Destruction and pain? He had no answer to that. His mother's voice softened slightly. I'm not without sympathy, Alexander. I was young once. I had dreams that didn't include becoming the Duchess of Thornfield. But I learned to find satisfaction in duty, in managing the estates, in raising you and Edward, in playing the role I was given with grace and competence. You can do the same. Did you ever love Father? I grew to love him in my way. Respect and partnership can become love given time. It's a quieter love than what poets describe, but it's perhaps more enduring. I don't want quiet love. I want what I felt with Catherine. Then you're still a fool. But she said it almost tenderly. That kind of love burns hot and fast, Alexander. It consumes everything. Do you really think it would have lasted? 6 months in an isolated village with no responsibilities, no pressures, playing at being ordinary people. How long before reality intruded? Before she discovered all the ways you don't actually understand her world, or you realized how ill-equipped she was for yours. We would have made it work. Perhaps. Or perhaps you would have both been miserable, trapped in a relationship built on a foundation of lies and impossible expectations. She reached for his hand. Let her go, Alexander. Let her rebuild her life. Marry Victoria. Do your duty. And maybe in time, you'll find a different kind of happiness. A week later, Alexander sat in the drawing room of Pemberton House, facing Lady Victoria for the first time since his return. She was, as he remembered, beautiful in a cold, classical way, impeccably dressed, perfectly mannered, everything a duchess should be. Your Grace, she said, her voice cool, how good of you to finally appear, Lady Victoria. I owe you an apology for my absence. You owe me rather more than that, I should think. Explanations, perhaps. Assurances that you won't disappear again on the eve of our wedding. He studied her face, searching for any sign of warmth, of genuine feeling. There was none. This was a business arrangement for her as much as for him. 2 prominent families joining fortunes and influence. I needed time away, he said carefully, to reconcile myself to the responsibilities ahead. And have you reconciled yourself? I'm here. That's not an answer, but I suppose it will have to do. She arranged her skirts with precise movements. My father has set the wedding date for April 15th. St. George's, Hanover Square. 500 guests. The Archbishop of Canterbury will officiate. I trust you have no objections. No objections. Excellent. Then we can move forward with the arrangements. I'll send you the guest list for approval, though I expect you'll rubber stamp whatever I've decided. You've never shown much interest in these details. Victoria, he said impulsively, do you want this? Truly want to marry me? She looked at him with surprise. What an odd question. We've been engaged for 3 years. The contracts are signed, the settlements arranged. Of course I want to marry you. You're the Duke of Thornfield. But do you want to marry me? Alexander Hartley, the man, not the title. I don't understand the distinction. You are your title, Your Grace. It's inseparable from who you are. She tilted her head, studying him. Did something happen during your absence? You seem different. I met someone who made that distinction very clearly. Understanding flickered across her face. I see. A woman, I presume? Someone inappropriate whom you had to leave behind when you returned to your senses. Something like that. Well, I hope you got it out of your system. Men are allowed their indiscretions, I suppose, as long as they're discreet and don't let them interfere with their responsibilities. Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. I have no illusions about romantic love, Your Grace. Our marriage will be one of mutual benefit and respect. You'll manage your estates and political interests. I'll manage the household and social obligations, and we'll produce the requisite heir and spare. It's a perfectly reasonable arrangement. Is that really all you want from marriage? It's all I expect from an aristocratic marriage, which is rather different. What I want is irrelevant. I'm the daughter of an earl, raised to become a duchess. This is my function, my purpose. I'll perform it admirably. Alexander felt a profound sadness wash over him, not for himself, but for Victoria, for this perfectly polished woman who had been raised to expect nothing from life but duty and performance. Did you ever want something different, he asked quietly. For just a moment something flickered in her eyes, something human and vulnerable. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual cool composure. Wanting something different is a luxury neither of us can afford, Your Grace. We are who we are. We do what we must. That's the price of our privilege. She was right, of course. She was right. And his mother was right, and James was right. He was the Duke of Thornfield, and that came with inescapable obligations. Catherine had been right too in refusing him. She had seen more clearly than he had that there was no bridge between their worlds that wouldn't collapse under the weight of reality. But God, how it hurt. The weeks passed in a blur of wedding preparations and estate business. Alexander threw himself into work with almost desperate intensity. He met with his stewards, reviewed accounts, attended parliamentary sessions, fulfilled every social obligation. He was the perfect duke, attentive and responsible. And every night he returned to Thornfield House and stared at Catherine's sketch, the only piece of his time in Whitmore Bay that he had kept. James found him one evening in his study, the sketch on his desk beside a glass of whiskey. Your Grace, this arrived today. He held out a letter. Alexander recognized the handwriting immediately and felt his heart stop. Catherine's elegant script, addressing him formally as His Grace, the Duke of Thornfield. With shaking hands, he opened it. Your Grace, I am writing to inform you that I have left my position at the vicarage in Whitmore Bay and will be relocating to Scotland, where I have secured a new post. I am also writing to request that you cease any attempts to contact me or provide for me financially. Your secretary's efforts to establish an anonymous trust were well-intentioned, but transparent. I will not accept money from you, no matter how carefully disguised. I value my independence too highly to be kept, however distantly, by the man who deceived me. I have tried to be angry with you. I wanted to hate you for the lies, for the months of deception, for making me love someone who didn't exist. But I find I can't sustain that anger. I'm simply sad. Sad for what we might have been if you had been honest from the beginning. Sad for the Alexander Hart I loved, who I now realize was only a small part of who you truly are. Sad for both of us, trapped in lives we didn't entirely choose. I hope you find happiness in your marriage, Your Grace, or at least contentment. I hope your bride appreciates the good man I know exists beneath the title and responsibilities. And I hope someday you can forgive yourself for what happened between us. I have forgiven you, though I can never forget. And I ask that you extend me the same courtesy. Remember our time together, but let me go. Respectfully, Catherine Wells, P.S. I am keeping the ring. Not as a symbol of broken promises, but as a reminder that for a brief time I was loved by someone who saw me clearly. That's a gift, even if it came wrapped in deception. Alexander read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in his desk drawer along with her sketch. Your Grace, James said quietly. Are you all right? She's keeping the ring, Alexander said, and to his horror he felt tears burning in his eyes. After everything, she's keeping the ring. Perhaps that's her way of holding on to what was real between you, even if the circumstances weren't. I destroyed her, James. I disrupted her life, broke her heart, forced her to leave a position she valued. And she's forgiving me. She's a remarkable woman. I know. I've always known. He looked up at his secretary. Tell me honestly, did I do the right thing in returning, in choosing duty over love? James was quiet for a long moment. I think you did the only thing you could do, given who you are and what you owe to others. Whether it was right or wrong, I can't say, but it was necessary. That's not the same thing. No, Your Grace, it rarely is. 2 days before the wedding, Alexander's mother summoned him to her rooms. She was much weaker now, barely able to sit up, but her eyes were still sharp. I won't live to see you married, she said without preamble. The physicians give me days, perhaps a week. So I'm going to say this now. I'm proud of you, Alexander. You did the right thing in returning, in honoring your commitments. Your father would be proud too, would he? Or would he think me a coward for not fighting for what I wanted? Your father was many things, but he understood duty. He would understand your choice. She reached for his hand. But Alexander, I need you to promise me something, anything. Don't let what happened with that governess poison your marriage to Victoria. Don't compare her to a fantasy. Don't punish her for not being someone else. Give her a fair chance to be a good wife to you. I'll try. And Alexander, in your private heart, you're allowed to remember Whitmore Bay. You're allowed to keep that time as something precious, even if it was built on lies. Just don't let it destroy your future. She died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep. The wedding was postponed for a month of mourning, then rescheduled for May. Catherine, in her small cottage in the Scottish Highlands, read about the Dowager Duchess's death in a month-old newspaper. She cried, not for the woman she had never met, but for Alexander, alone with his grief and his impossible choices. She touched the ring she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. And in her womb, unknown to anyone, Alexander's child was growing. The final devastating consequence of their impossible love. 1 year later. The morning of Alexander's wedding dawned clear and bright over London, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed designed to mock him. He stood at the window of his dressing room in Thornfield House, already dressed in his formal wedding attire, and watched the city wake beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. In a few hours, he would marry Lady Victoria Pemberton in the grandest social event of the season. 500 guests, the Archbishop of Canterbury, every important family in England. The Prince of Wales himself would attend. It would be perfect, flawless, everything a ducal wedding should be, and it would be the death of whatever hope he had left. James entered without knocking, carrying a small wooden box. Your Grace, the family jewels for Lady Victoria, your mother's wedding gift to her, as discussed. Alexander took the box mechanically. Inside lay the Thornfield diamonds, generations of accumulated wealth compressed into stones that caught the morning light and shattered it into rainbows. They were worth a fortune. They were beautiful. They were as cold as the marriage they would adorn. Your Grace, James said carefully, if you're having second thought— I've had nothing but second thoughts for a year, James, but they change nothing. Alexander closed the box with a sharp click. The contracts are signed, the guests are arriving, the church is prepared. There's no turning back now. There's always a choice. No, not for people like me. My mother understood that. Victoria understands it. Even Catherine understood it, which is why she had the wisdom to refuse me. He turned from the window. How do I look? Appropriately ducal. You look like a man going to his execution. How fitting. The ride to St. George's was a blur of London streets, lined with people who had come to glimpse the Duke of Thornfield on his wedding day. They cheered as his carriage passed. They threw flowers. They had no idea they were celebrating a funeral. The church was magnificent, filled with enough flowers to stock a dozen gardens. Every pew was packed with aristocracy, their jewels glittering in the light streaming through stained glass windows. The organ played softly as Alexander took his position at the altar, flanked by his brother Edward, who was serving as his best man despite looking profoundly uncomfortable in the role. "You don't have to do this," Edward whispered. "We could run right now out the side door, to hell with all of them. You know I do have to do this. I know you think you do. It's not the same thing. Edward, please. This is hard enough without you offering escape routes I can't take." His brother fell silent, but the sympathy in his eyes was almost unbearable. The organ music swelled, signaling Victoria's arrival. Alexander turned to watch her process down the aisle on her father's arm, and he had to admit she looked magnificent. Her dress was a masterpiece of French silk and English lace, her veil a cascade of the finest Brussels work. The Pemberton diamonds sparkled at her throat. She looked like a queen. She looked like a duchess. She looked like everything she had been raised to be, and Alexander felt absolutely nothing. Victoria reached the altar and took her place beside him. Under her veil, her face was composed, perfect. She looked at him with cool assessment, as if checking that he had remembered to appear on time, then turned her attention to the Archbishop. The ceremony began. Alexander heard himself making the responses at the appropriate moments, his voice steady and clear. He watched his hand reach out to take Victoria's. He felt the weight of the Thornfield ring as he slid it onto her finger. He listened to the Archbishop pronounce them man and wife, and through it all he was thinking of another woman, in another place, holding another child, because 3 months ago a letter had arrived, not from Catherine, but from a doctor in the Scottish Highlands, written with the careful delicacy of someone conveying difficult news. "Your Grace, I write to you with information concerning Miss Catherine Wells, who's been my patient these past months. Miss Wells is unaware that I am contacting you and would be most distressed if she knew. Your Grace, Miss Wells is with child. Your child, I presume, though she has never named the father. She plans to raise the infant alone on her modest governess's salary, in circumstances that can only be described as difficult. I write not to demand anything of you, but to inform you of the situation. What you choose to do with this information is, of course, your own affair. But I thought you should know that you will soon be a father. Respectfully, Dr. Malcolm Fraser." Alexander had read that letter 100 times. He had written responses 100 times. He had made plans to go to Scotland, to find Catherine, to somehow make this right. But how? He was days away from marrying Victoria. The scandal of breaking the engagement now would be catastrophic, and even if he did, even if he went to Catherine and begged her to marry him, she would refuse. She had made that clear in her letter. She wouldn't be kept by him, wouldn't accept his money, wouldn't enter his world. So he had done nothing. He had arranged, through the same anonymous channels Catherine had already refused, for funds to be made available for the child's care. He had no doubt she would refuse those too. His child would grow up in Scotland, raised by a woman who had loved him once, never knowing their father was the Duke of Thornfield. The price of his deception had come due, and it was higher than he could ever have imagined. "You may kiss your bride," the Archbishop said, and Alexander realized with a start that the ceremony had concluded. He was married. He lifted Victoria's veil and kissed her. It was chaste, appropriate, utterly devoid of feeling. The congregation applauded politely. The Duke and Duchess of Thornfield proceeded down the aisle to thunderous organ music and the cheers of London's finest families. Rice was thrown. Bells rang. It was exactly as it should be. In the carriage returning to Thornfield House for the reception, Victoria examined her new ring with satisfaction. "Well," she said, "that went perfectly. Not a single mishap. Mother will be pleased. I'm glad it met expectations." She glanced at him. "You're thinking of her, aren't you, your governess?" Alexander was too tired to dissemble. "Yes, I see." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Does she think of you, do you suppose? I imagine she tries very hard not to, but she does anyway." "Yes, I believe she does." Victoria turned to look out the window at the celebrating crowds. "It must be difficult, loving someone you can't have. I wouldn't know. I've never loved anyone. Never, never. I was raised to see love as a weakness, a distraction from duty. My mother made quite sure I understood that romantic attachment was for lesser people, not for those of us born to rule. She said it without bitterness, simply stating a fact. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like. To feel what you apparently feel for this woman, its agony. Is it worth it, the agony, I mean?" Alexander thought of Catherine's smile, her laugh, the way she saw beauty in ordinary things. He thought of their walks on the cliffs, their lessons with the children, the evenings by his cottage fire. He thought of the child he would never know, growing in her womb. "Yes," he said quietly. Even now, even knowing how it ended, yes, it was worth it. How strange. Victoria turned back to him. "Well, Your Grace, I can promise you I will never cause you such agony. Our marriage will be comfortable, predictable, appropriate. No passion, but no pain either. Is that really all you want from life?" "It's all I was taught to want, and perhaps that's a mercy. One can't miss what one has never known." The reception was a glittering affair that lasted well into the evening. Alexander danced the required dances, greeted the required guests, made the required toasts. He performed his role flawlessly, as he always had. But that night, alone in his rooms for the last time before he would be expected to share Victoria's bed, he sat at his desk and wrote a letter he would never send. "My dearest Catherine, today I married another woman. I stood at the altar and made vows I will keep, because I am nothing if not a man of duty. But every word I spoke was a lie, because my heart belongs to you and always will. I know about the child. I know you're carrying our baby and planning to raise them alone. I know you'll refuse any help I try to offer. I know you'll do everything in your power to keep our child from knowing who their father is, and I understand why. I understand that you're protecting them from my world, from the scandal and judgment and cruelty that would follow if anyone knew. I understand that you're being brave and strong and doing what you think is best. But Catherine, please know this. I would have given up everything for you and our child. The title, the estates, all of it. I would have walked away from duty and responsibility and lived in poverty if it meant being with you. You were right to refuse me. You were right that I could never truly understand your world, that bringing you into mine would have destroyed you. You were wiser than I was, braver than I could ever be. But God, how I wish things were different. How I wish I had been honest from the beginning. How I wish we lived in a world where a duke could marry a governess and no one would care. How I wish our child could know their father. I will live the rest of my life with this regret. I will do my duty, manage my estates, play my role, and I will think of you every single day. You and the child I will never meet. The family I will never have. The life I might have lived if I had been a different man, or if the world had been a different place. I love you, Catherine Wells. I loved you from the moment you showed me the lichen on the rocks and explained how simple things can be complex in their simplicity. I love you still. I will love you until the day I die, and I am so sorry for everything. Yours always, Alexander." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer with her sketch and her first letter, monuments to the life he had lost. Then he stood, straightened his shoulders, and walked down the hall to his wife's rooms. He knocked and entered when she called. Victoria was seated at her dressing table, her wedding dress already replaced by an elegant nightgown, her hair brushed out and falling loose around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, almost vulnerable. "Your Grace," she said, seeing him in the mirror. "I wasn't certain you would come tonight. We need an heir eventually. We might as well begin the process. How romantic." But there was no real criticism in her tone. "Very well, let's fulfill our duties to the bloodline." It was mechanical, perfunctory, exactly what one would expect from an arranged aristocratic marriage. Afterward, Victoria returned to her dressing table to pin up her hair, and Alexander stood at her window looking out over the gardens. "This is our life now," Victoria said. "Is it bearable?" "It will have to be. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have." She studied him in the mirror. "You're going to be miserable, aren't you? Forever thinking of what you lost, comparing me to her, regretting your choices." "I'll try not to. But you will anyway." She turned to face him. "Alexander, I'm not a fool. I know you don't love me, that you probably never will. But I would appreciate it if you could at least be present in the life we're building, rather than constantly dwelling in a past you can't change. I'll do my best. That's all I ask." She stood and moved to her bed. "You may go now. I don't require you to stay the night. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. We're not a love match. We don't need to pretend to be one in private." It was a mercy, and he took it. He returned to his own rooms and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Catherine. 300 miles north, In a tiny cottage in the Scottish Highlands, Catherine Wells sat by her window, watching rain fall over the heather-covered hills. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, where Alexander's child moved and kicked. She had read about his wedding in the papers. She had seen the descriptions of the ceremony, the guests, the beautiful bride. She had even seen a sketch of the Duke and his new Duchess leaving the church, looking every inch the perfect aristocratic couple. It had hurt more than she expected. Even knowing it was inevitable, even having told him to go back to his life, seeing the proof of it rendered in newsprint had been devastating. But she had her child. This small life growing inside her, half hers and half his, the product of those brief months when she had believed in fairy tales. "Your father married someone else today," she whispered to her unborn baby. "He's the Duke of Thornfield now, properly settled with a proper duchess, and we're here, just the two of us, about to start our own life." She pulled out the ring she kept on a chain around her neck, the one Alexander had given her in his cottage when he thought they could build a future together. She touched it gently, remembering. "He loved us, though," she continued softly. "In his way, with his limitations, he loved us. That's something, isn't it? It's not enough, but it's something." The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Catherine smiled through her tears. "We'll be all right," she promised. "I'll make sure of it. I'll teach you everything my father taught me. We'll walk these hills and study the plants and birds. I'll tell you stories. I'll raise you to be strong and independent, and to never ever build your happiness on someone else's lies." She would name the baby Eleanor, after the grandmother who would never know her. Eleanor Wells, daughter of a governess, granddaughter of a naturalist. She would never tell her child about the Duke, never burden her daughter with the knowledge of a father who couldn't claim her, a world she could never enter, a title she could never inherit. Better to let Eleanor grow up believing she was simply loved by her mother, wanted by her mother, enough for her mother. It was a lie, but a kinder one than the truth. "I forgave him," Catherine whispered to the rain and the hills and the gathering darkness. "But God, how it still hurts." In London, in his magnificent house, the Duke of Thornfield stood at his window and looked out at the same rain falling on a different landscape. Somewhere in Scotland, the woman he loved was carrying his child. Somewhere in this vast house, his wife was sleeping alone, content with their loveless arrangement, and he was trapped between them, belonging fully to neither, forever divided by the choices he had made and the lies he had told. This was his life now. Duty fulfilled, responsibilities met, every expectation satisfied. And he had never been more alone. The years would pass. He would do good work, manage his estates well, take his place in Parliament, and advocate for important causes. Victoria would give him the required heir and spare. He would be remembered as a responsible, competent duke. But every night he would take out Catherine's sketch and her letters and remember what it felt like to be simply Alexander Hart, loved by a woman who saw him clearly. And every night he would grieve for the child growing up in Scotland, for the family he would never know, for the life he had traded for duty. Some wounds never heal, some losses never fade, some loves never die, even when they're impossible. Alexander Hartley, Duke of Thornfield, had learned that truth in the cruelest way possible, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. 20 years later, rain drummed against the windows of Thornfield House as the Duke sat in his study, now greying at the temples, reading the Morning Post. His marriage to Victoria had produced 2 children, both grown now. His estates thrived. His political career had been distinguished. He had lived exactly the life everyone expected of him. Among the letters was one with unfamiliar handwriting. He opened it without particular interest, then froze as he read the first line. "Your Grace, you don't know me, but my name is Eleanor Wells. My mother was Catherine Wells. She passed away last month, and in her effects I found letters that suggest you knew her well many years ago." Alexander's hand shook as he continued reading. "Before she died, my mother told me the truth about my father. About you. She made me promise never to contact you, never to disrupt your life, but she also left me something she thought you should have now that she's gone. Enclosed is the ring you gave her. She wore it every day of her life, hidden beneath her dress. She said it reminded her that for a brief time she was loved completely and honestly, even if the circumstances were complicated. I'm not writing to ask for anything, Your Grace. I have my own life, my own career as a naturalist like my grandfather. I don't need or want anything from you. I just thought you should know that my mother spoke of you sometimes, in her final days. She said you taught her about the cost of duty, and that she hoped you had found some measure of peace in the life you chose. She also wanted me to tell you that she never regretted our time together, despite everything. That knowing you, loving you, even briefly, was worth the pain that followed. She forgave you, Your Grace. I hope that brings you some comfort. Respectfully, Eleanor Wells. The ring fell from the envelope into Alexander's palm, simple gold, exactly as he remembered it. He closed his fingers around it and felt 20 years of carefully controlled grief crash over him like a wave. Catherine was gone, dead and buried in Scotland, having spent her life raising their daughter alone, never asking for his help, never revealing his secret. And he had never known, had spent 20 years wondering, hoping, occasionally making discreet inquiries that went nowhere. She was gone, and he had never had the chance to tell her that every word in his unsent letter had been true, that he had thought of her every single day, that he had loved her until the moment she died, and would love her still until he joined her. Victoria found him hours later, still sitting in his study with the ring in his hand and tears streaming down his face. "Alexander," she said softly. She never called him by his name. Always Your Grace in public, nothing at all in private. He couldn't speak. He simply handed her the letter. She read it slowly, then set it down and looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Something almost like compassion. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Truly I am. She must have been extraordinary to inspire such devotion." She was. "Did you ever stop loving her? Not for a single day?" Victoria nodded as if this confirmed something she had always suspected. "And our children. Did you love them?" "Of course. They're my children. But not the way you would have loved hers." It was true, and they both knew it. "I'm sorry, Victoria. You deserved better than what I gave you. We both deserved better than what we got." She moved to the window. "But we did our duty, we played our roles, and that has to be enough, doesn't it?" "Does it?" "It has to be, because it's all we have left." After she left, Alexander sat alone with the ring and thought about Catherine, about their daughter Eleanor, about all the years that had passed and all the moments he had missed. He had made his choice long ago. He had chosen duty over love, responsibility over happiness, the life he was born to over the life he wanted, and the cost had been everything that mattered. The rain continued to fall over London, washing the streets clean, as if the world itself were weeping for all the loves that couldn't survive the weight of duty, all the hearts broken by impossible choices, all the lives lived in service to obligations that left no room for joy. Alexander Hartley, Duke of Thornfield, slipped his daughter's ring onto his smallest finger and felt the circle of gold settle into place. It was all he would ever have of the family he might have known, the life he might have lived, the love he had sacrificed for duty, and it would have to be enough even though it never could be. What did you think of Alexander and Catherine's tragic love story? Could they have found a way to be together, or was their separation inevitable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel for more dramatic tales of love, loss, and the impossible choices that define us. And if you enjoyed this journey through Victorian heartbreak, leave a like to let me know. Thank you for listening to this tale of a love that was real, but couldn't survive the cruel divide between duty and desire. Until next time, may you find the courage to be honest in love, even when honesty costs everything. Take care, and remember, some loves are worth the pain even when they can never be.